Uh, Welcome to this next episode in the series of our digital programs of Wednesday Wisdom Webinars and Friday Fundamentals. And today's topic is actually a very unique topic, which is talking about energy from green economy and social justice. Actually, the green economy provides a macroeconomic approach to sustainable economic growth with a central focus on investments, employment, and skills. Multi-stakeholder partnerships for the promotion of a green economy are supported to accelerate and consolidate sustainable changes in both consumption and production patterns. It is very important for sustainable development. Green technology generates energy without non-toxic, harmful byproducts, uh, and also green economy suggests making alternative environment-prone technology. It helps reducing waste and pollution by changing patterns of production and consumption. In a green economy, growth in employment and in income are driven by public and private investment into such economic activities, infrastructure, and assets that allow reduced carbon emissions and pollution. Enhanced energy and resource efficiency, and prevention of loss of biodiversity and economic ecosystem services. The green economy has the potential to sustain growth beyond oil booms and minerals. It can make growth resilient to environmental degradation and climate change, which would ensure food, water, and energy supply to all the people. And our today's speaker, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, is a well-known person in this field, and I have the pleasure of introducing her to the audience. Dr. Karve has completed her PhD in physics from University of Pune in 1998. Her first research project resulted in the development of a process for converting agriculture waste into charcoal. The technology won the Ashton Award for Renewable Energy in 2002. In a career spanning more than 20 years, Dr. Karve invented a number of improved biomass burning cooking devices to reduce smoke in the kitchen and dependence on firewood for domestic cooking in rural areas. She has also worked on decentralized organic waste to fuel technologies. She developed a methodology for technology selection and promotion to improve adoption of clean cooking energy devices by end users. In the past 5 years or so, her work has also focused on devising and promoting strategies for low carbon, sustainable urbanization. She has published more than 30 research papers in peer-reviewed journals and has contributed to technical books. In 2005, she started Samuchit Envirotech, a social enterprise that promotes environmentally sustainable energy and lifestyle products. Dr. Karve, who is the managing director of Samuchit, has also invented an easy-to-use Samuchit carbon footprint calculator for urban Indians and conducts workshops in climate-friendly lifestyle, sustainable urbanization, etc. She is also founder director of Orja Box LLP, a woman-led green startup from 2021. Dr. Karve is actively involved in national and international organizations working in the field of renewable energy, equitable sustainable development, climate resilience, etc. Over the years, she has successfully led numerous short-term funded projects based on scientific and technological research, technology dissemination and commercialization, third-party assessments, and policy advocacy. She is a founder member and a member of Board of Directors of Clean Energy SS Network, a registered society in India, and serves on governing and advisory bodies of a number of other national and international organizations. She is also the national convener of Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change. She teaches courses on sustainability, physics, and big history at Symbiosis International University. In addition, she is co-editor of Shaikshanik Sandarbh, a Marathi language bi-monthly on science and education, and a member of the board of editors of Confluence Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies. Her work has been honored by several national and international awards, including World Technology Award in Environment category 2005, Sahyadri Hirakani Award in 2011, and Vasundhara Award in 2014, and Unch Mazazoka Award in 2015 in Environment category, etc. She is a TEDx speaker and has also featured in a number of national and international periodicals, publications, radio and television programs, and podcasts. Dr. Karve, we are honored to have you for the session, and over to you, ma'am. I think you are on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So let me share my screen and we can immediately get into the topic.
Yes.
Okay, I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah. So hello everyone, and I'm going to talk about nothing very technical, but some thought processes around how we can focus on green economy and social justice together through the path of eco-friendly energy systems. Let me start off by delving a bit into history. And then we will come to what is happening at the present times. The economic system that we are in right now, that is a product of the Industrial Revolution, which triggered or rather accelerated in 19th century, middle of the 19th century, through the invention of the steam engine and increased use of fossil energy, coal and petroleum, to drive this increased productivity which was brought in by the steam engine. We have to understand that industrialization in Europe, in the United Kingdom and other European countries, that had already started from about 16th century. But the steam engine sort of accelerated that entire process. And if you think in terms of the planetary system of which we are a part, so Earth has a lot of species. We are one of those species. So there is this bigger circle of the planet, and people, that's us. We are one part of that circle. And people as a community do a lot of things with each other. One of those things is economic activity. So economic activity is a circle within the circle of human endeavors. So that's how you can look at this picture in front of you. Now, industrialization, when it started in Europe and triggered by the steam engine, before the steam engine came on board, the industries were being driven by water and wind energy mainly. So it was the water wheels and the windmills. And these are dilute energy sources, intermittent energy sources. So the inputs going into the system were also less. The products that were being produced were also limited in number, and basically whatever resources were locally available and whatever market was locally available, the needs were being met. But once you get the steam engine into the picture, it can deliver a tremendous amount of power, which increases the capacity of the machines to take in inputs by multiple times, and also manufacture goods at a much faster rate and in much larger quantities. So very soon you have a situation where the industries can practically run 24/7 as long as you have labor to run those machines, and that's how exploitation of the labor forces starts. But very soon, and particularly in Great Britain, which is a small country, you run out of your local resources and you are producing more goods than the local market can absorb. So that was the trigger for the imperialism. Why did the Europeans go out of the way to try and conquer other countries? It was mainly to be able to control more resources and to also control bigger markets. So the steam engine is, in a way, an invention which changed the course of history. And it brought in imperialism, which then meant that people all over the world were being exploited now, not just in Europe. And resources were being consumed in an indiscriminate manner. So the planet was also being exploited. And all of this was primarily focused on delivering profits for a handful of Europeans. Sitting at the highest rung in the European societies. So, this was the economic system, this was the way businesses operated in the 19th century. This situation remained almost till the Second World War. In the 20th century, new ideas started emerging. Firstly, after the Second World War, it became more expensive to maintain an empire than the profits that people were making out of the empire, and therefore all the European empires broke up between 1940 to 1960, and a lot of countries gained independence in that period, including us. Um, at the same time, this was the period when ideas around human rights started emerging. Ideas around labor rights started emerging. Communism started growing. So, in a way, it became there was also opposition to slavery. So, all of this meant that industries couldn't indiscriminately keep on exploiting people. Also, businesses started realizing that if the working conditions are better, if your labor force is mentally and physically fit, then their productivity is higher. And that is also going to contribute more to your profit. So there is a benefit in making things better for people who work for you. And also towards the end of this the 20th century, ideas like corporate social responsibility also started emerging, because there was this thought process that if you want to sell your products in a market, then the market, I mean, you need consumers who have the ability to buy, which means that there is a benefit, there is an indirect economic benefit to businesses in living, in having a society which is prosperous. And therefore, if you can spend a little bit of your profit in improving the human condition in general, that is ultimately going to bring dividends back to you. So, with those thought processes, businesses at least attempted to be people friendly. I wouldn't say that this has been achieved in a large extent. We still see a lot of industries which do indulge in exploitation. But there are at least laws in place, and there is a genuine attempt by many big corporations to ensure that the labor force which works with them has at least a minimum dignity in their living. So you can see that the 19th century was entirely focused on profit. 20th century, there was a slight opening up, there was a slight outward vision which started delivering social good also. But the planet continued to be exploited, resources continued to be exploited, and there was always this conflict. The narrative always has been that if businesses have to thrive, and businesses need to thrive because that is what generates wealth, that is what generates employment, and that is what delivers social good. But businesses to thrive means that some of the environment will have to be sacrificed. So that has been the 20th century narrative, that in order to have development, you have to sacrifice environment. And that is how this was always juxtaposed, that we need to keep on exploiting the planet if we want to deliver social good and make economic gains for the business to continue existing. However, because of this, we started hitting the limits of the planet. After all, we live on a very large planet, but it is still a finite planet, and therefore there are finite resources. So it is suddenly hitting people. It started hitting people towards the latter half of the 20th century, that we need to actually conserve the environment for our own existence. Because if we run out of resources, then the whole human civilization and the economic system is going to collapse anyway. So we need to create a system which will stop exploitation of the planet also. And that is how I mean, if we see this historical trend, that you start from profit, then start embracing good for the people in it, the next logical step obviously is that the businesses have to be planet friendly also. And that has been increasingly the thinking in this century, in the 21st century, and we see that happening around us. A lot of businesses are now going out of the way to try and project themselves how eco-friendly they are, how they are not causing harm to the planet, how they are conscious about the environmental issues facing us and trying to address those. So while profit making, of course, continues to be at the heart of economic activity, there is a genuine attempt to be people friendly, and now increasingly there is a genuine attempt to be planet friendly. And that has been sort of the evolution that is happening within this economic system, which we have started building from the industrial revolution. So this has been a trend, a historical trend. And at this point in time, we are just 20 years into this new century. Where do we go from here? How does this evolve? How does the economic system become more and more sustainable? These are the questions that we are grappling with. Now, what has happened in the meanwhile, as I said some time back, that we have started hitting the limits of the resources available to us from the planet. And today we are facing this sort of a dual challenge, that on one hand, climate change is the biggest threat that is there in front of us. Under the Paris Agreement, everybody, all the nations have agreed that by 2100, we should reach a situation where we are not using any fossil energy at all. So by 2100, the human civilization wants to stop using fossil fuels. That is part of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't get talked about a lot because 2100 is far ahead in the future, but it's not really that far ahead. I mean, kids who are born today, many of them will see 2100. It's just 80 years down the line. And at that point in time, human civilization should not be using any fossil fuels. That is the only way we are going to be able to really solve the climate change problem for future generations going beyond the 21st century. Right now, all our discussions right now in Glasgow conference is happening around climate change. I'm sure all of you have read the headlines that India has committed to be net carbon zero by 2070. Now that also is an interesting year to pick, because I mean, look at the entire political establishment that India has today, including people in power as well as people in opposition. None of them are going to be alive in 2070. So basically, the current political establishment has said that we are leaving the job to the next generation. That's what that 2070 deadline means. But coming back to the point, that is just an interim thing. Ultimately, the goal is that by 2100, we want to be totally turning off coal and petroleum. But at the same time, there are still about 1 billion people across the world who do not have access to electricity. There are about 3 billion people across the world who cook on firewood. So there are still a substantial number of people who do not have access to even basic energy services. And we are increasingly creating a civilizational system in which energy is becoming as essential as roti, kapda, and makan. Because think about it, today you want to access education, you want to access health services, you want to access banking services, you want to access news, you want to apply for job, even if you want to buy a train ticket or a bus ticket or a movie ticket, you need to have access to internet, and internet means you have to have access to electricity. So energy is driving our life increasingly, and therefore affordable access to a minimum level of energy service is akin to, I mean, it has to be a human right now. Just as getting 2000 calories of nutritious food is a human right, getting affordable access to a certain minimum level of energy service is also increasingly being recognized as a human right. So how do we balance these two things? That on one hand, we want to reduce our dependence on fossil energy, but at the same time, we want to ensure that there is a certain amount of energy access for everyone in the human society. So this is really the big challenge of this century as far as the energy sector is concerned. Now, it's not that suddenly on 2001 this challenge emerged. People have been talking about this for a long time. In fact, in 1960s there was first in the developed world a serious attempt was made to try and reduce dependence on fossil fuels and shift to renewable energy. Interestingly, the trigger for at that time was neither human rights nor environment. At that time, the trigger was purely political. The petroleum was coming from the Arab world, and there were certain political tensions which made the Europeans and Americans realize that this over dependence on others to supply us with energy is actually weakening our political negotiation power. And therefore, we need to stop using fossil fuels. And that is how research in renewable energy systems started. But post 1980s, there has been an increasing evidence of the direct link between fossil fuel use and climate change, and therefore there was that additional impetus for replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources. Now, this, however, all the 20th century attempts haven't really been very successful. And the reason for that is the energy system that we today use. And let's think in terms of electricity, because that's something with which everyone is familiar and we know typically how it operates. We typically have a coal-fired power plant, which is producing some megawatts of power, which then gets distributed everywhere through the electric grid, and the end users access that power and run whatever equipment that they want to run. And in general, this is all driven by who is able to afford to pay for that electricity. And those who can pay more will get a better access. So people living in Mumbai are paying a higher price to ensure that there are no power cuts. But in rural areas where the capacity to pay is less, there are more power cuts. So electricity is not supplied on the basis of need, it is supplied on the basis of buying power. And there is centralized power generation, centrally controlled distribution, and then the end users will get it or not get it to run their systems. That's the kind of a system that we have created. And now we are trying to just plug in renewable energy into this existing system. And that creates problems, because what happens here is, let's say that I have this same system. I want to have centralized generation, centrally controlled distribution, and then the end users. But instead of a coal fired power plant, I want to hook up with a wind farm. But a megawatt scale wind power farm, which I'm building instead of the coal fired power plant, will have a much larger area, because wind energy is dilute. Also, it is intermittent, which means that I need to have an electricity storage system, a battery system, which is going to occupy some more area. So the total land area, the total footprint of this plant will be much larger than that of a coal-fired power plant. And this is an important consideration in a, especially in the Indian context, where we have much larger population relative to the space that is available to us. So can we really afford to have all the coal-fired power plants replaced by these type of systems which occupy so much space? There are already also studies which show that these large scale wind farms are causing local environmental problems like deforestation or biodiversity impacts and so on and so forth. So all of those issues start coming in, and therefore there is a limited viability for this. You can't build wind farms anywhere and everywhere. There are only certain locations where this is going to be possible, but the rest of the system remains the same. So this is not really the way forward, because this is putting limitations on how much renewable energy you can bring online into this overall system. And this is, I'm giving you the example of just the electricity system here. We use energy in the form of electricity and fuels. We basically, at the end point, we need either mechanical energy, or we need directly electricity to run our computers and all our electric devices, and we need heat. So we use electricity and we use fuels. So fuels is another story altogether. So this existing energy systems, just remove coal, insert renewable energy, is not really the way forward. This is not going to take us a long way. What we need is to throw out the existing energy system and rebuild a new one, which is aligned with the strengths of renewable energy sources. Now, what are those strengths? One big strength of, and if you think in terms of less so for wind, but more for solar, the sun is shining everywhere. So it's not necessary that you have to produce your electricity only in one location. You can harvest sunlight anywhere and you can produce electricity anywhere. So this whole idea of centralized electricity production and then distribution all over the space is meaningless if you are thinking in terms of renewable energy sources, because renewable energy sources are typically available in many more locations than coal and petroleum. Also, taking into account the fact that we want to ensure a certain minimum level of energy service for everyone, it cannot just be driven by buying capacity. Just as we say that as a citizen of India, I am entitled to a certain quality of life, and energy is part of that. And therefore, every individual must get a certain amount of energy which allows him or her to live a respectable quality of life. So the needs of people, the basic needs, have to be prioritized. So that is another aspect of this new energy system. And we also have to realize that because renewable energy sources are dilute compared to coal and petroleum, we may not get, at a given point in time, we may not have as much abundant electricity and fuels in our hand, as we are getting currently from the fossil fuel based economic system, which means that we really need to invest in better efficiency, both in terms of equipments and also in terms of processes. So there is a lot of innovation in technology that is needed. New policies are needed. New thinking is needed. Behavioral change is needed. Technological innovation is needed. And this will create an energy system which is aligned with the strengths of the renewable energy sources. And typically, this will be based on decentralized renewable energy systems. So it is much easier to put solar panels on our rooftop and get that energy directly in the building. That's a much easier and a much better way of harvesting electricity from sunlight, rather than trying to build a solar farm which is producing, say, megawatts of power by spreading solar panels over a large area. So there are certain advantages of taking the decentralized route. And if you think in those terms, then we already have the buildings standing on a piece of land. So it is just a matter of using the rooftop of an existing building. So you are not really destroying any forests or occupying any farmland or anything like that. You are using a piece of land which has already been used for doing something else. Now you are also harvesting energy from that. So there are those environmental advantages also from this process. And in the long run, and even now, renewable based electricity generation is already much cheaper, even if you include the cost of energy storage. Even including that, it is now much cheaper to produce electricity using solar and wind than to produce electricity using coal. And that's why we see in many countries, the transition has already started happening, where people are moving away from coal and bringing on board more and more solar and wind power. Germany is a very good example of this transition, and this has been possible in Germany primarily through the process of decentralized renewables. The only thing that they did is they just brought in the policy of feed-in tariff. We also have it now here in India, but basically the Germans were the first ones who said that you can use your rooftops to produce electricity, use the electricity, surplus electricity, the grid will buy from you. Now that triggered an innovation in building architecture, because architects then started designing buildings in such a way that the building will use less electricity and more electricity will be available for selling back to the grid. And that is how suddenly the German electric grid is actually facing the reverse problem now. There are more sellers than buyers, because everybody is making their own electricity. So that has been a total transition from coal fired electricity towards renewable electricity. So that is the kind of change that we need to bring into the system to really make this transition happen. And it's not just about electricity. We can have generation and local distribution on a cluster basis. So if you look at a village or a cluster of villages, there can be a local microgrid which will be powered by a few windmills and rooftop solar systems and energy storage. This system obviously is going to be climate friendly. It will tick the agenda of moving away from fossil fuels and reducing carbon emissions. And because you are generating power within the community, some interesting negotiations can happen. One very interesting example comes from Himachal Pradesh, where the water mills, there are traditional water mills there, which are used for grinding grain. Now you just put a dynamo on the water mill and it starts producing electricity. So there are NGOs which introduce this idea there, and these mill owners, they started producing electricity along with providing the grain grinding service. So during daytime it runs as a flour mill. During night time it produces electricity, because night time is when people need electricity. Now what happens is that guy is also living in the same community. So suppose, and this what I'm telling you are real incidences happening, that in the village there is a wedding that is going to happen. So people will negotiate with this guy that, look, there is a wedding that is happening for 4 days, nobody is going to work, we are all going to be in this one location, and we want to play music and have lighting and all of that. So don't make grain flour, just produce electricity 24 by 7 for these 4 days. Those kind of interesting negotiations can happen, and more fair access which actually meets local needs becomes possible in these kind of community based systems. So this is the direction in which we'll have to start moving, not just with electricity, even with transport. If we prioritize public transport and private vehicle use goes down in the city, if the city is designed more for non-motorized transport, walking, cycling, and whatever private vehicles you go for electric vehicles, there are solar, it has to be solar electric, then only it will give you the benefit. So you have electric vehicle, but the charging is from solar power. And you can make biofuels from organic waste and use that as a backup to this entire system. So the transport sector can sort of transform to for small distances, non-motorized transport. Then comes public transport, and private vehicles are the least priority, and the whole thing is powered by solar electric and biofuels from waste. For thermal applications, again the same story, we can have a neighborhood fuel grid which also provides an organic waste management service, because that's a big problem for cities and industries. What do we do with the waste? So convert that waste into energy, use the energy locally itself. For residential sector, in fact, going off grid is very, very easy. You can have rooftop solar system. You can make biogas from your own kitchen waste for cooking energy, and you are done. You don't have to depend on any pipeline. You don't have to depend on any electric wires coming in. That's it's possible in many cases, especially in tropical countries. So in this way, taking an entirely out of the box approach, not being constrained by the framework of the existing energy system, we can move to an energy system which is predominantly renewable energy based, and it is also delivering a fair distribution of energy services, and that way it is delivering social good. The other big advantage of this is most of the technologies required for this are relatively low tech. You don't need to spend millions of dollars or anything to create this infrastructure. And there is a huge potential for new employment generation. So job creation also is a big bonus of this approach. So DRE based services accessible to everyone, local entrepreneurship, local employment, local service delivery, you are achieving economic prosperity as well as social good. So this is the kind of a vision that we really need to transform our energy systems. Now the big question is, can we really practically do this? Do we have enough energy? So I'm just going to end with these some numbers for you to think about. Today, and this is data from 2020, which the data is from 2020, but it is from prior to that. Typically, the total energy being used across the world at this point in time is 16 terawatts per year. Out of that, 13 terawatts comes from fossil fuels. So in spite of all the stories that you hear about so much solar energy is growing and wind is growing, it is hardly 1/5 of the total energy that we are using right now. 2050, our energy need will double for a variety of reasons. And Paris Agreement demands that half of that energy in 2050 must come from non-fossil fuel sources. So let us assume that all of this has to come from renewable energy. So 2050, we will need 32 terawatts per year. Out of that, 16 terawatts. So the entire energy that we use today, that much energy has to come from renewables in another 30 years. Is this even possible? So keep in mind this number, 16 terawatts per year is the 2050 target for renewable energy. And this is the potential only of solar energy. With solar energy that is currently received on planet Earth across the world, we can produce 7,500 terawatts per year of electricity plus 5,600 terawatts per year heat. And using the solar electricity, we can break water molecules and get hydrogen as fuel, 2,500 terawatts per year of fuel. There is a tremendous potential out there. What we need is a minuscule part of this. So definitely, technologically, there are no barriers. This is definitely possible. And these numbers are based on technologies that are currently available. New technologies, better technologies will keep on coming. So actually, the entire planet can be run on renewable energy for centuries to come. We have enough sources. We just need to build a system which is designed for harvesting these sources and not try to fit the sources to a system which was designed for fossil fuels. The only thing that is lacking in this equation is actually the political will to make this happen. Even in the Indian context, our current solar electricity target is 800 gigawatt, 500 gigawatts. The potential of solar electricity in India is 8,000 gigawatts. So 500 gigawatts has to be looked at in that context. And right now, 50% of our electricity is still coming from coal. So we can make a much quicker transition if we have the willingness to break down and rebuild the entire energy system. Of course, money is a big constraint here, but this also means that there is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs, because this is an entirely uncharted area. New innovative business approaches can come into play here and create new mechanisms, new systems of developing renewable energy based energy services to meet our climate change goals, as well as to deliver social good to all our population. So that's the kind of visionary thinking that is needed. And frankly, political establishment is not equipped for this, because politicians do not take bold decisions. They follow public opinion. They have to win elections after all. So it is the entrepreneurs who are in a position to go out there and take these bold steps, think outside the box and build this system, which will open up an entirely new direction for the global economic system also. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer questions. Any other comments that you would like to add from your business perspective? I'm very keen on that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So Dr. Karve, thank you very much for such a insightful presentation, and you put it so simply. I will say that a person like me who doesn't know anything about it was able to pick up few of the points. You talked about the evolution of because of the economic activity, evolution of the energy requirements from in 19th century. It was only for profits, moved to some amount of social change which was happening in 20th century, but the planet continued to be exploited because of different reasons. And then people and the governments decided to sacrifice some environment for the growth, which was there, that continued to happen. But in 21st century, as we move in, now they are moving towards more people-friendly and planet-friendly approach, which is happening. And you also talked about the Paris Agreement, and affordable access to energy should be a human right, which I think if our children and their children, if they have to live longer, it is must, which is important, I think, which you talked about. And you also showed us different ways by which economically this can be produced, and without being dependent on others, and it's so economical to produce it. So thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. My first thought which comes to it, if it is so easy and if it is so cheap, then what are the challenges? One challenge you mentioned about the political will, because of XYZ reasons which politicians have, that's perfectly. But beyond that, if I see, if we have to bring that change in the society, and then what are those challenges which are coming, which can help us to achieve that?
So one big challenge is that the power that the fossil fuel industry holds across the world. And increasingly, evidences have come up which show that since 1950s, the global fossil fuel industry knew that continued use of fossil energy is going to cause environmental problems. And they spend a lot of effort and money on trying to suppress that information, not let scientists work in that field. And there has been that constant resistance happening right from then. And even now, I mean, if you follow the, unfortunately, the Indian media reports only what is relevant coming from the Indian negotiators. But if you look at the overall global picture, one of the interesting point that has been discussed a lot is that in the conference that is happening in Glasgow, the largest delegation is from fossil fuel industry, bigger than any individual country. So that is the kind of a power that is wielded by the industry. They have constantly fought to even wording in the agreements are being negotiated right now to remove any reference to the link between coal, petroleum, and climate change. So that is the biggest barrier actually. And that is why I feel that local, homegrown, grassroots level entrepreneurship is the only way to fight this.
And these recent coal shortages, which was coming in media, India and China, has it anything to do with this conference happening, or I don't know? Because,
Well, the main reason for that is basically the demand and supply issues.
Okay.
That because of the economic slowdown due to COVID,
Yes.
lockdowns and all, the demand went down and therefore the supply also went down. But now the demand is suddenly surging, but supply takes some time to start meeting that demand. So that's the phase that we are in right now. But of course, I mean, everybody tries to also then gain some political mileage out of the shortages.
And so my senior colleague, Indranil ji, I think, had raised a hand. Indranil ji, would you like to, do you have some question?
Yeah, it was really a very, very interesting topic, and as a call topic, which is very, very close to my heart, because you have talked about profit, people, and planet. That means 3P, which is the bottom of the line.
Yeah.
So this is something, something really bottom of the pyramid you have touched. And really, I love to talk to you or discuss with you on the subject in future also. But I have two, 3 points, because you are basically you are telling about the decentralized form of generation. And second thing, you are very much, whatever you have talked so far, is you are very much supporting PV solar. Now, I have two big questions on that. Number one, PV solar is not at all environmental friendly, according to me. So PV solar is not at all environmental friendly. When PV solar is not environmental friendly, we have a second alternative, that is go for solar thermal. Now, so when you go for solar thermal, you need a centralized form of generation. Solar thermal cannot come anywhere. It has to come either in Kutch area or Rajasthan desert in Rajasthan, somewhere like that, right? So now this is a something fundamental shift, which I am trying to point out. I may be wrong, but you are the right person to
So
say.
can I, can I
Yeah,
answer
I have
that?
some more
this,
questions.
yes,
Yeah, fine.
yeah. So this was true about 10 years back, that solar PV, and this was actually the case, that solar PV system was consuming more energy than it would produce during its lifetime, which is no longer the case.
Not only that, even disposal
I'm
of the.
coming to that.
Yeah.
No, disposal is not a problem, because there are first, one part of it is the electronic waste challenge, which is anyway there for all energy systems. The other part is the panel itself, which is silicon, which is an inert material. So yes, it is going to litter, but it's not going to cause any pollution. After all, biggest part of the planet
is also there.
That can be harvested, that can be recycled and harvested. Technologies are already, even windmills, there was a big hullabaloo that you cannot recycle.
Madam, I will come to windmill later. Let us finish
that
this.
also, that problem also has been solved. So see, one cannot expect a solution to come out with 100% perfection.
Yeah.
When it starts getting implemented, it will always have some challenges, and people will keep on working on those challenges and solving those. And that has been the case with both solar and wind. Having said that, let me clarify that personally, I am not in favor of any of like any one or the other or anything like that. And my own personal experience is in the bio energy field. So it's like I don't have any vested interest in promoting any type of renewable energy systems anyway. But I'm talking as a physicist, since I keep abreast of the research that is happening. This is my understanding of the current situation.
Okay, fine, madam. I have a few more points to discuss. This Mr. Sharma Sahab allows me. Rajesh Sharma Sahab, do you allow
All
me?
is yours, sir.
And
all
I say,
is yours.
because this is something very, very interesting topic. I would
Sure,
like
please.
to discuss, and maybe many of my doubts which are already there with me will get resolved now. Right? So, I will call you later. I am in a meeting. See, one thing is, if you see solar thermal is much more efficient and economic than PV solar. Number one. Number one is it because when you talk about gigawatt of generation, you have to definitely think of solar thermal, not PV solar. PV solar has a limited capacity. It can illuminate a building, it can illuminate a house, it can illuminate a street, or it can illuminate a village. But if you want to illuminate the entire country, you need solar thermal. So that is a first point we have to understand, right? Number two.
No, I agree with you that if you have to have a centralized system, and that there will be some centralized power generation that will be required.
Because PV solar cannot run an industry. If you want to run, suppose as for example, if you want to run Tata Steel, if PV solar will not.
In fact, it makes more sense to harvest heat directly. Why to make electricity? Right. That is perfectly all right. And I did mention, although I didn't go into the depths of that even the heat requirement has to be fulfilled by solar and biofuels. And there I meant solar thermal, obviously. Right. So yes, if you are, and there will be some centralized power generation that will anyway have to happen to back the overall system. Right. But my point is that it has to be priority to decentralized, and then you see what gap you need to fill and plan the centralized accordingly because of the space requirement mainly. Okay. And in that case, yes, I mean, solar thermal obviously makes more sense than solar PV for mega scale power generation. That I totally agree with.
Right. Now, so far space is concerned, already we have it has been experimented that floating windmill and also floating solar plant also are there. I mean, if you see, take the example of Gujarat, because so far renewable energy is concerned, Gujarat is one of the states which you can refer. If you see in Narmada Canal, they have entirely canal they have covered with PV solar panels, right? So even space, if you see that a solar farm or wind farm takes a lot of space, yes, alternatives are already available, and
Yeah, you
also
can
maybe
even
something.
have marine wind farms. There have been floating windmills even in dams, sorry, floating solar panels in dams.
Yeah.
One still has to be a bit, I mean, canal is a different thing altogether, but if it is a natural water body, then what effect that has on the ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem, because of blockage of sunlight, that is something that has to be thought about. So one has to keep
Right.
some space free for sunlight to penetrate down.
Because
So
we do not want
those
to.
kind of issues have to be taken into consideration. It cannot just be a technology focused solution.
Right. One more point, madam. See, first of all, if you think the state like Gujarat, where Gujarat has a lot of windmills. Of course, Maharashtra also has Ahmednagar side, as well as Tamil Nadu also
Yep.
have a lot of wind farms. Now, wind farm has a very peculiarity. You know, it generates maximum in the very early morning, when
Yep.
windmill generates maximum at the early morning, when we do
Yep.
not need power.
Right.
We need power in the evening. So
Right.
these windmills cannot cater the evening peak need, and that is why you need some alternative. That means you need a storage, and
Yes.
electricity storage as of now is not feasible. It is not viable. Also, it is not economic.
It is now increasingly becoming viable and economical, even environment friendly.
Yeah.
The lithium recycling is relatively easier, and
And what is the
there are
cost?
calculations.
Cost is very
No,
high.
cost is not a consideration here in this case,
Yeah.
because the cost of not doing the shift is much higher.
Right.
Cost of sticking with fossil fuels is much higher anyway, in terms of not just economic cost, but the cost in terms of human life also. So that, from that perspective, cost is out of the equation now, the kind of crisis situation that we are in. But with the lithium based, and now there is one new technology that has come in, but increasingly storage, and that is one of the reasons for the sudden acceleration of increase in solar and wind technologies that we are seeing across the world now, because the storage technologies was always the bottleneck, but that is being solved now.
No, madam,
And
still now
better
it is a
technologies are
bottleneck,
coming on.
and that is why the political parties, they declare free power for the farmers. And
Yeah.
what they do is they will allow agricultural load from night 11 o'clock to
Yes.
morning 6 o'clock.
Yeah, that is
Actually,
to manage the
that is to
load.
manage the
Yeah,
generation.
yeah, yeah,
That is to
yeah,
manage the
that's true.
generation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, madam, I have two more questions. One small question is, see, as for example, when we are talking about Rajesh Sharma, sir, is it okay for you if I ask two more questions?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. One of the very important point is about centralized generation. See, wave tidal power or wave power is a huge potential. We have only maybe tits and bits experiment has been done in
Yeah.
Scotland area,
Yeah.
North European countries. There is no much research done. If you see in coastal Maharashtra as well as Karnataka, especially Goa and Kerala, where backwaters are there, and also Sundarban areas in West Bengal, there are mangroves, mangrove plants are there, and also backwater. At the high tide, the backwater goes inside, deep inside the in the land,
Right. Yeah.
and when in the low tide they comes out. Right?
Yeah.
That power can be capped. Again, it will support the. It will require a centralized
True.
power generation.
True. True.
So,
Well, yes and no, in the sense that as you also said, that this hasn't really been attempted on a large scale anywhere. So we have to see how the costs work out. Secondly, one has to also be a bit cautious about doing things in the coastal belts, in view of the climate change impacts that are happening in the coastal belt now, with increasing frequency and intensity of cyclones, with rising sea level, the various changes that are happening in ocean currents themselves. There has been some interesting data that I was seeing the other day, where year on year, over the last a few decades, there was a mapping of how ocean currents themselves are changing. And that is one of the big factors which is influencing the weather systems across the world. But that is also going to influence the wave dynamics.
Okay.
So the data on the basis of which one plans these projects may no longer remain valid a few decades down the line. So those kind of issues are there in harvesting wave and tidal energy.
Right.
So we have to just wait and see how these technologies emerge.
Okay. Now, actually, I am tempted to ask you another question, not one, two more questions. Okay. If time permits and if also Rajesh Sharma sir permits me. See, one is, madam, that micro hydro, what you are talking about Himachal Pradesh, right? It is not only in Himachal Pradesh. If you see, micro hydro is even possible in Konkan belt.
Yes, it is.
It is quite
It is
possible.
already there in the Eastern Ghats. Already there are a few projects.
I will give you an example. Suppose if you go to Roha,
yeah,
okay, and you know there is a river. I don't remember the name of the river. So there you will find lot of water flow is coming, even in dry season also. And that is also can be a very big potential for micro hydro, and it will not pollute the environment, and it will not pollute, it will not disturb the ecosystem. So that is something is quite possible. That is the micro hydro. Similar way, there can be micro wind turbine also at the rooftop. You can have a micro wind turbine. Many places earlier we used to see in Mumbai itself, but nowadays we don't see. I do not know what happened to them. Maybe
so actually solar wind hybrid is also a good option.
Solar wind hybrid is also there. So this is something I wanted to point out. And last point is, as you are working in biofuel and biogasifier, as you were talking about at the beginning when your profile was read, madam, one thing I will definitely I need your opinion on that, because biogasifier is not at all environmental friendly.
True, I agree. And I don't work in biogasifier at all. I work on biogas.
Okay.
Which is environment friendly because you are burning the methane, and it is basically you are harvesting carbon from the natural carbon cycle to do work for you. And I'm not an advocate of these municipal waste to energy kind of a systems at all. I feel that waste should not travel. I mean, burning diesel in trucks to transport organic waste to some facility where you then make biogas out of only 50% of it is just total nonsense. It is not a waste to energy system at all. It is just a waste management system. If the waste is converted into biogas on location, so again, it is decentralized micro scale biogas generation, and use the gas in that location itself, that is the way to use biofuels. If anybody is planting some special crop just to produce biofuels, that is also totally not eco-friendly. Use organic waste that is anyway being generated from other processes. It could be agricultural waste, it could be municipal solid waste, but the waste should not travel. Convert it into fuel where it is available. Use that fuel also in the same vicinity. That is the right way of using biofuels.
Thank you, madam. It was a very enlightening introduction. I would not take much time of yours, but definitely I would like to be in touch with you in future also.
Sure.
And I would love to work on the subjects what you are talking. Right, ma'am.
Sure.
Thank you very
much.
Thank you, Indranil ji. I didn't know that we have such an expert within our team as well, who has such a knowledge.
I am basically a power and energy professional, sir.
Okay. Dr. Karve, there was a question from Manish. I don't know, right now he's on the call. He asked, how are you converting oil into a wattage?
So that's a standard way if you want to add up various energies and talk about numbers. So you talk in terms of the wattage that you will get out of burning that oil. That is the number that we are talking about there.
Okay. And then there is another question from Ganpati. I don't know if he's on there. He says that how does one get individual household and societies to come into mainstream and participate in this movement? Is it awareness, education? If you can enlighten us on something on that kind of thing.
So yes, partly it is education and awareness, but partly it is also a fact that it has to make economic sense to either the household, or in fact for at a housing society level, in fact it is much easier. There was, and I have to admit it, being part of this movement, the whole renewable energy movement was initiated and pushed by social activists with a few scientists who did not really think from the commercial mindset there. And therefore the whole idea is that this is good for environment, and therefore people should do it and even sacrifice if necessary. But that's not how you get people on board. And increasingly now, a lot of young people are coming up with interesting innovative business models around these processes. We also have some good policies now. So for example, in Maharashtra we can now sell electricity to the grid if from our rooftop system. There are still kinks in the system, and the local officials will create a whole lot of barriers, but at least the policy is there. One can fight the system, and as more and more systems start emerging, it will become mainstream. But I was talking to a person who works as a consultant in this field, based in Mumbai itself. And he made a very interesting observation. He said that if you are a housing society, and if your common electricity bill, the money that you pay monthly to the electric company, if that is more than 13 rupees per unit, then you are actually making a loss by keeping your corpus fund in a fixed deposit. You should invest that fund in a rooftop solar system and use that electricity that is more economically beneficial to you. So those kind of calculations is what we need to, they have to emerge and be explained to people. And with that kind of a thought process, now more and more people are coming on board. There is a young entrepreneur in Pune who is selling biogas systems for households and societies, and it is a service model. So he is not just selling the plant, but he is also assuring of service, and there is a metering of the gas happening. So eventually it can even become a case where instead of a natural gas pipeline coming in, you may have a biogas pipeline coming in and pay a monthly bill on that. That is the direction in which these businesses are moving. So it has to make economic sense, and it has to be easy to use and operate. That will bring in more and more people into this fold, and that realization is coming now, and entrepreneurs are coming forward.
Okay, thank you. We have our past president Chayaji, who has joined us in this session, and knowing her, I'm sure she has some questions and thoughts to share. Chayaji, you are welcome.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Rajesh. Hello, Dr. Karve. It was a delight to sit through your presentation in 45 minutes. How somebody can encapsulate, the origin to what is going to be the future of the energy, the alternative energy, and how the humanity is going to face the struggles and benefits from the alternative energy was something very, very interesting. And I don't think that you missed out on a single important data that would be required to convince the viewer. So thank you so much. I was really impressed with the presentation. There was one passing comment that you made about Germany.
Yeah.
The decentralized model where every house is encouraged to produce its own energy, and that is how now the demand is demand reversal has taken place. Right? There is more supply than demand. I want to know a few things, if you know about that model, as to how that model was made effective, since you say that eventually what lacks is the political will. And secondly, what it will take in a country like India, to make that model effective, because people are enterprising. You called upon the entrepreneurs to make the most of it. I personally feel that Indian public is most entrepreneurial. What
True.
will it take to invite their interest in it? Apart from a figure like if you're paying more than 13 rupees, then actually you are at a loss, which is going to be very, very appealing to the Indian
Yeah.
public, where we are very cost conscious, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what are those other things that we could do to promote that kind of a model, and what all that Germany did? I would really love to learn about that. So please educate us on that.
Sure. So this has been Germany has been a case study of this approach, and there are, if you start searching, even Google will give you a lot of interesting literature on this. But one important thing which they did is they really offered an attractive price for electricity being produced by people and being sold to the grid. And that's a big difference from the feed-in tariff system that we have currently in India, where the power company is not even giving you any money. They just adjust it against your use of electricity, and the price offered is also very low because there is already an investment in power generation. So taking on additional power from private generators is becoming a problem for the grid, and that is where financial assistance is needed and political will is needed. In Germany, they consciously, and this is an interesting phenomenon, that it was not a response to the climate situation. It was not done with an intention to reduce coal fired power at all. It was done with an intention to move away from nuclear electricity. Now, whether that's the right approach or not is a different discussion altogether, and I don't want to get into that. But that was the motivation that they had, that there was a lot of power generation that was coming from nuclear power stations, and they had decided to phase out nuclear from their energy system. And that is why then what to replace that with. So they came up with this idea that let people generate their own power and we will give them an attractive price. And as this power generation starts increasing, we start shutting down the nuclear power plants. And that is what they have actually done. So that was the big factor there, that offering an attractive price, which made it economically very attractive for people to invest in their rooftop systems.
So then we don't see that happening anytime soon here, as long as, you know, the electricity is being supplied by the private companies. Because
so
obviously
whether it is, yeah, exactly. I mean, they have already invested, and there has to be some support for them to take, that loss has to be absorbed by the government if that transition is to be made.
Thank you so much. Another question, or rather maybe I don't know if it comes across as a question to you, is about the Kochi airport. We all know how famously Kochi airport has been fully functional with
solar. Yes.
So what is it that they have done? How has government pitched in over there? What has government done there? What is there to learn from that model which could be used to say anywhere else also?
So that's actually a good example of how a targeted system succeeds. So you have an airport which has a certain, so you already know how much electricity it's going to need. And in fact, Kochi airport is fairly small. That is another advantage there compared to other airports. It's a relatively smaller airport, but once the airport is already there and it is consuming electricity, you know exactly how much power you are going to need daily. So it's just a matter of installing a system which will generate that much power, and there are not going to be too much variations there because it is a single entity which is using all that power. So that's a good example of how that's another part of exploiting a strength of a renewable energy system, that if you have a pretty good idea of how much power is needed and what is the profile, like over 24 hours, how that power requirement is going to vary, if that is going to be fixed more or less, and that will happen if you have a single user, then it becomes relatively easier to shift that power generation to say a solar system or something like that. So that is the key to its success.
So one
and the fact that it's a small airport relatively. Yeah.
So one can begin this way on a per unit basis. Say, for example, when these luxury hotels are being constructed,
Yeah,
The
exactly.
government is constructing these airports, or there, if as long as we can utilize this.
Yeah.
So there
So
are
one has
building
to one has to identify these kind of applications where it is going to be relatively easy and less challenging, and just shift those electricity usages to renewable energy, and step by step so luxury hotels is a good example. And there are now these green building code and so on, where there are incentives for using renewable energy. But stronger policies can definitely be put in place, which will sort of mandate that if you are building a certain type of infrastructure, it has to be, say, 50% renewable energy powered, or 80% renewable energy powered, or something like that.
because I see these luxury hotels extremely brand conscious, and they like to advertise right from their toilet, that you should not use the towel ones. This, I mean, they could do something bigger and much better than
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
thank you, ma'am. I will like to keep in touch with you also.
Sure.
Benefit from your research and insights.
Sure. Thank you.
Please share your contact details in the chat box.
I'll put it in the chat.
Chat box. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Chayaji. And unless before I move to the next question, I'll request the participants to put on their camera with a smile to have a photograph by our BMS staff. Unless there is another question, I have a final question to you. Though maybe
I think there are some questions in chat, maybe.
I have tried to pick up all of them.
Okay.
I have already picked up all of them, and
great.
yeah. And so I know it's a very long shot, but is it possible for the world to be 100% renewable anytime?
It has to be. If we have to survive, then it has to move in that direction. And as I said, definitely by the end of the century, but the more we can bring that date earlier, the better. Because every 0.1 degree centigrade increase in the global average temperature is causing a lot of hardship and loss of life, loss of infrastructure. So the earlier we get there, the better.
It's causing a lot of havoc.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Dr. Kave, for such a in-depth presentation and also discussion on the subject, and making us aware about the needs and also the sensitivities of the green energy for the human mankind. So thank you very much for that. I thank our past president Chayaji to be present in the meeting. In between, our current president Kavita ji was also available in the meeting, though she's traveling out of Bombay, and also our EC member Indranil ji to join, and all the participants. And I will request all the participants who are not member of BMA to become member of Bombay Management Association. Bombay Management Association continues its endeavor to bring education and awareness to masses, and also corporates, and also to the students. We will continue to do that with full strength and with full vigor in coming times as well. And we will continue with our online presentations on Wednesday Wisdom webinars and also Friday fundamentals. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dr. Kave.
Thank you everyone, and thank you for interesting questions also.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.